Welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, you're not alone. For the next 2 hours, let your thoughts fade as these unsettling stories fill the silence. If you're watching this right now, tap the like button and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Let the darkness settle and let the stories take over. 22 years behind the wheel of a taxi in Chicago had taught me that the city reveals itself differently after midnight. The gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets of daytime transform into something more honest after dark, a landscape of shadows, secrets, and solitary figures. I'd seen it all: drunken confessions, tearful breakdowns, hushed conspiracies in my back seat. But nothing prepared me for my encounter with the man I picked up outside Union Station on a rainy Tuesday last October. I hadn't planned to work that night. My daughter Melissa was visiting from college, and we'd scheduled dinner at her favorite Italian place in Wicker Park. But she called that afternoon with apologies and excuses about a study group for a midterm, so I decided to take the late shift instead. The extra money would help with her tuition anyway. The rain had been steady since sundown, the kind that doesn't pound but persists, turning the city streets into shimmering mirrors, reflecting neon signs and traffic lights. Business was decent, the weather keeping the rideshare drivers at bay and sending more fares my way. By 11:30 p.m., I'd already made enough to justify calling it a night, but something kept me cruising the downtown streets. Maybe it was the rhythm of the windshield wipers, or the jazz playing low on the radio, or just the meditative state that comes from driving familiar routes while the world sleeps. I just dropped off a pair of tourists at their hotel near Millennium Park and was heading west on Adams when the dispatch crackled with a pickup request at Union Station. Late for a train station, the last Amtrak would have departed hours ago. Still, I took the fare, making a left onto Canal Street and pulling up to the nearly deserted entrance. The Grand Beaux-Arts building loomed against the night sky, its massive columns illuminated from below, creating long shadows that stretched across the wet pavement. I waited, engine idling, scanning the entrance for my passenger. For nearly 5 minutes, I saw no one. I was about to call dispatch to report a no-show when a figure emerged from the shadows beside one of the columns. He hadn't come from inside the station, which I found odd, but from the darkness alongside it, as if he'd been waiting there all along, watching. He approached slowly, unhurried by the rain that soaked his uncovered head and shoulders. No luggage, not even a briefcase. Just a man in a dark suit that might once have been expensive, but now hung slightly loose on his frame. When he opened the back door and slid into my cab, the interior light illuminated a face I still see when I close my eyes at night. 3722 Ravenswood, he said, before I could ask for his destination. His voice was soft but precise, each syllable carefully articulated as if English were not his first language, though I couldn't detect any specific accent. I nodded and pulled away from the curb, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. He was older than I'd initially thought, mid-60s perhaps, with a lean face and silver hair cut close to his scalp. His eyes were what caught my attention, pale blue, almost colorless, and unnervingly alert for this hour of the night. No sign of fatigue or the usual late-night glassiness from alcohol. Coming in late or heading out early? I asked, making the kind of small talk that becomes second nature in this job. Some passengers want conversation, others silence. I've learned to gauge which is which within the first exchange. He didn't answer immediately, and I thought perhaps he fell into the latter category. Then, after a full minute of silence, neither. I was observing. Something about the way he said it, clinical, detached, raised the fine hairs on the back of my neck. But 2 decades of city driving teaches you not to judge. I'd driven stranger characters, performance artists, night shift morgue attendants, undercover cops. Chicago attracts all types. Observing what? I asked, eyes on the road as I navigated through the late-night traffic of the Loop, heading north. Patterns, he replied. Human patterns. The station is an excellent place for that. Arrivals, departures, reunions, farewells. The full spectrum of emotion on display. Like people watching? My wife enjoys that at cafes. He made a sound that might have been a laugh, though it contained no warmth. Not quite the same. Your wife observes for amusement. I observe for understanding. Rain drummed steadily on the roof of the cab as we crossed the Chicago River, the downtown skyline receding behind us. In the mirror, I could see him staring out the window, but his eyes didn't seem to follow the passing scenery. They remained fixed, as if looking at something much farther away, or perhaps not outside the car at all. You've been driving this route a long time, he said suddenly. Not a question, but a statement. 22 years next month, I confirmed, somewhat surprised. How did you know? The way you handle the vehicle, the familiarity with which you navigate. The worn spot on the left side of the steering wheel where your hand rests. He leaned forward slightly. And the photograph. My eyes flickered to the small framed picture clipped to my sun visor. Me with much darker hair, standing proudly beside my newly purchased taxi 2 decades earlier. You notice details, I said, unsure whether to be impressed or concerned. It's what I do, he replied simply. As we continued north into Lincoln Square, I found myself checking the mirror more frequently. He sat perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, posture straight, no fidgeting with a phone like most passengers, no slouching against the door in exhaustion, just that steady, alert stillness that felt somehow predatory. What about you? I asked, breaking another stretch of silence. What line of work are you in? His pale eyes met mine in the mirror. Assessment, he said after a moment. I evaluate situations and people. Like a consultant, that same cold, almost laugh. Of a sort. We were approaching Ravenswood now, turning onto increasingly residential streets lined with century-old trees whose branches formed a canopy overhead, catching the rain and creating a different rhythm on the roof of the cab. Almost there, I said needlessly, just to fill the growing silence. Yes, he agreed. But perhaps we could take a slight detour first. I find I'm not quite ready to conclude our conversation. I should have said no. Every instinct honed from years of late-night driving in a major city was signaling caution. But there was something compelling about his calm authority, something that made refusal seem both impolite and somehow unwise. Where did you have in mind? I asked, my voice steady despite my unease. Graceland Cemetery would be appropriate, he said. We can drive along the perimeter. The request was odd, but not alarming. Graceland wasn't far from his stated destination, and while a cemetery at midnight in the rain might seem like the setting for a horror movie, the reality was just a quiet, enclosed green space. No different from driving around a park after hours. I made the turn that would take us to the historic cemetery's edge, where a decorative iron fence separated the land of the dead from the bustling north side neighborhoods surrounding it. Graceland has quite a history, I said, settling back into tour guide mode, a comfortable role. Lots of Chicago's famous names are buried: Marshall Field, George Pullman, several mayors, and many others whose names history has forgotten, he added. The anonymous dead who outnumber the famous. Does that trouble you, I wonder? The idea that despite all our striving, most of us will be entirely forgotten within 2 generations? The conversation had taken a morbid turn, but taxi drivers become amateur philosophers by necessity. Late nights, diverse passengers, and the strange intimacy of a shared car interior lead to unexpected depths. I don't think much about legacy, I answered honestly. I'm more concerned with how I live than how I'll be remembered. A healthy perspective, he said, though something in his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. And your daughter? Melissa, is it? What future do you envision for her? I nearly drove off the road. How do you know my daughter's name? I demanded, all pretense of casual conversation gone. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I slowed the cab, ready to pull over. In the mirror, his expression remained unchanged, those pale eyes still watching me with clinical detachment. You have a text notification on your phone screen, he said, nodding toward my device in its dashboard mount. From Melissa, visible when your screen lit up at our last stoplight. Given your age and the college tuition you mentioned to the previous passengers, I deduced she was your daughter, rather than a spouse or friend. The explanation was reasonable, yet something felt off. I hadn't remembered seeing any notification, and I certainly hadn't mentioned tuition to my last fare. The tourists, who had barely spoken English, unless he had been watching me longer than just tonight. I think we'll skip the cemetery tour, I said firmly, making a U-turn at the next intersection. I'll take you directly to your destination. As you wish, he replied, seemingly unbothered by the change. Though I find most people are more uncomfortable with the living than with the dead. The dead, after all, can only haunt us metaphorically. We drove in tense silence for several blocks, the only sounds the swish of tires on wet pavement and the steady rhythm of the wipers. I kept my eyes on the road, but every instinct was focused on the man behind me, acutely aware of each shift in his posture, each breath. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a reflective quality. Did you know that a person's driving tells you almost everything about them? The cautious ones who signal a full block before turning. The impulsive ones who swerve across 3 lanes. The passive-aggressive ones who deliberately slow down when tailgated. He paused. You drive like someone accustomed to going unnoticed. Smooth, steady, nothing to draw attention. Invisible. The observation hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I had always prided myself on being reliable rather than remarkable. The steady provider for my family, the predictable presence in my daughter's life after her mother left us when Melissa was just 7. There's value in reliability, I said defensively. Indeed, he agreed. Though I wonder if your daughter sees it that way. The younger generation often mistakes stability for stagnation. We were turning onto Ravenswood Avenue now, approaching the address he had given. The street was lined with vintage apartment buildings, their stone facades dark with rain, windows mostly dark at this hour. Almost there, I said, eager to conclude this increasingly uncomfortable ride. Stop here, he instructed suddenly, when we were still about half a block from the address he'd provided. I pulled over, putting the car in park and turning slightly in my seat to face him, hand hovering near the emergency button on my dispatch radio, a precaution that suddenly seemed prudent. That'll be 2370, I said, keeping my voice professional. He made no move to pay or to exit the vehicle. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, those pale eyes locked on mine. I've enjoyed our conversation, David, he said, using my name for the first time, a name I was certain I hadn't shared with him. It's been most illuminating. How do you know my name? I demanded, all pretense of customer service gone from my voice. He smiled then, a slight movement of lips that never reached his eyes. The same way I know that you live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Albany Park. The same way I know that Melissa is studying pre-law at Northwestern, though she hasn't told you she's considering dropping out. The same way I know that you take your coffee black with 2 sugars, and that you've been skipping your blood pressure medication for the past month because the copay went up. My blood turned cold. These weren't lucky guesses or details he could have gleaned from observing me tonight. This was intimate knowledge of my daily life, my private concerns, my relationship with my daughter. "Who are you?" My voice was barely a whisper. "I told you, I assess situations and people." He reached inside his suit jacket, and I tensed, my hand moving to the door handle, ready to bolt from my own cab if necessary. But what he removed was not a weapon. It was a small leather folder, which he opened to reveal an ID card with a federal seal I didn't immediately recognize. "Gerald Mercer," he said, though I suspected even this name was a facade. "Office of Threat Assessment and Response, a division within a division, you might say." "I don't understand," I said, though a cold dread was building in my chest. "Why are you in my cab? Why do you know these things about me?" "Because for the past 11 days, you've been driving a passenger of significant interest to national security." His voice remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. "A man who boards at the Merchandise Mart stop every Thursday and Friday evening at approximately 7:15 p.m. and exits in Uptown. Average height, slim build, always carries a black messenger bag. You've driven him 4 times now." My mind raced through recent fares, trying to place the description. Then it clicked. A quiet man, good tipper, never made conversation. Nothing memorable about him except perhaps his punctuality. "I don't know anything about him," I said. "I just drive." "Precisely why he chose your cab," Mercer replied. "You're reliable, predictable, unthreatening, the perfect unwitting accomplice." "Accomplice to what?" Instead of answering directly, he pulled something else from his pocket. A small, flat device that looked like a sophisticated mobile phone. He tapped the screen a few times, then held it up. "This is a scanner for certain radioactive isotopes," he explained. "Your cab is registering positive for trace amounts of cesium-137. Not enough to be dangerous to you, but certainly enough to confirm that your passenger has been transporting radioactive material, most likely components for a radiological dispersal device." "A dirty bomb," I translated, my mouth dry. "You're saying I've been driving around a terrorist?" "We prefer not to use that term until motivations are confirmed," Mercer said with bureaucratic precision. "But essentially, yes." The rain seemed to drum louder on the roof as the implications sank in. Had I been 1 degree of separation from a mass casualty attack? Had my cab, my livelihood, been used to transport materials that could have killed countless people? "We've been tracking him for months," Mercer continued, "following financial transactions, communications, movements. But we needed physical confirmation of the materials before we could move in. Your cab provided that evidence." "So you've arrested him?" I asked, trying to make sense of why this federal agent was sitting in my back seat in the middle of the night if the suspect was already in custody. Something in Mercer's expression shifted, becoming even more detached, if that were possible. "Not exactly," he said. "The operation is ongoing, which brings me to the purpose of our meeting tonight." "We need your help, David," Mercer said, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic cadence. "Your passenger, Armin Kashani, is not important for you to know, has established a pattern. He trusts your cab, your route, your discretion. We cannot afford to disrupt that pattern." "You want me to keep driving him?" I said, disbelief evident in my voice. "While he's potentially building a bomb?" "We want you to continue exactly as you have been. Nothing more, nothing less." Mercer's pale eyes never left mine. "Our surveillance indicates he's planning to move the assembled device this Friday evening. He'll call for your cab specifically, as he has before. You'll drive him to his destination. Our team will handle the rest." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This is insane. I'm not a federal agent. I'm a cab driver with a daughter in college and high blood pressure. Which is precisely why you're perfect for this role, Mercer replied coolly. Kashani has vetted you in his way, just as we've vetted you in ours. You're the common element that allows us to get close enough for interdiction without alerting him. And if I refuse? I asked, already knowing there wasn't really a choice. Refusal isn't an option we're considering, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. National security imperatives supersede individual preferences. I turned to stare out at the rain-slicked street, at the ordinary apartment buildings where people slept, unaware of the conversation happening in a taxi parked outside. People who could be victims if this plot succeeded. People like Melissa. What exactly would I have to do? I asked finally. Mercer seemed to relax slightly, knowing he'd secured my cooperation, willing or not. Nothing out of the ordinary. Continue your regular shifts. When Kashani calls for your cab on Friday, respond as usual. Drive him wherever he directs you. The only difference will be this. He handed me what looked like a standard air freshener for my cab. A tracking and monitoring device, more sophisticated than anything commercially available. It will allow us to maintain real-time surveillance without detectable electronic signatures. I took the device, turning it over in my hands. It looked completely ordinary, the kind of pine-scented cardboard tree that hangs from rearview mirrors in cabs everywhere. That's it? I asked skeptically. That's it, he confirmed. You are not to engage Kashani in unusual conversation. You are not to attempt to extract information. You are simply to be the same forgettable driver you've always been to him. Our team will handle the rest. The insult stung, but I was too overwhelmed to care. 3 days. I had 3 days before I would be knowingly transporting a potential terrorist and his weapon through the streets of Chicago. What about my safety? What about other passengers I might have in the meantime? The trace amounts in your vehicle pose no health risk, Mercer assured me. As for your safety during the operation itself, we will have agents positioned along the entire route. At no point will you be without surveillance and protection. He reached into his pocket again and produced an envelope, which he placed on the seat beside him. $5,000, he said. Consider it hazard compensation. There will be an additional 10 upon successful completion of the operation. I stared at the envelope, not reaching for it. I don't want your money. I want a guarantee that I'll walk away from this alive and able to see my daughter graduate. No one can promise absolute certainty in operations of this nature, Mercer said with clinical detachment. But your role is designed to be minimal risk. You're most valuable to us and to Kashani, alive and behaving normally. He opened the door then, letting in the sound of rain and a gust of cold air. Before stepping out, he turned back. I'll contact you Thursday evening to confirm details. Until then, everything continues as normal. No deviation from routine, no calls to law enforcement, no conversations about this meeting. His pale eyes held mine. We're watching, David. Always watching. And then he was gone, a dark figure quickly swallowed by the rain and shadows, leaving me alone with an envelope of cash and a fake air freshener that suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The next 3 days passed in a fog of anxiety and sleepless nights. I drove my shifts mechanically, jumping at every fare request, scrutinizing every passenger who entered my cab. The air freshener hung from my mirror, a constant reminder of what was coming. I checked my rearview mirror obsessively, convinced I could spot Mercer's agents following me, though I never did. I considered running, taking Melissa and disappearing. But where would we go? How far could we get before they found us? And what would happen to the countless people who might die if this attack succeeded without me to lead them to Kashani? I thought about warning my regular Friday night passengers somehow. But what if Mercer was wrong? What if this was all some elaborate mistake, and I ended up accusing an innocent man of terrorism? And if Mercer was right, did I want to tip off someone planning mass murder? By Friday evening, I was functioning on caffeine and adrenaline, my nerves stretched to breaking point. At 7:05 p.m., I positioned my cab near the merchandise mart, as I did every Thursday and Friday. At 7:12, my dispatch radio crackled with a request for pickup at my exact location, requested by name. "This is it," I murmured to myself, accepting the fare with trembling fingers. When he slid into the back seat at 7:16, Kashani looked exactly as he always had. Average height, slim build, neatly trimmed beard, black messenger bag clutched on his lap. Nothing in his appearance screamed terrorist. He looked like any of the thousands of professionals who worked in the high-rises of downtown Chicago. "Good evening," he said with the same polite nod he always gave. "Oak Street, please." Not his usual uptown destination. My heart rate doubled. This was it, the deviation that Mercer had predicted. "Sure thing," I said, pulling away from the curb, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror, searching the surrounding traffic for any sign of surveillance teams. There was nothing obvious, no black SUVs, no agents speaking into wrist microphones. If they were there, they were good at blending in. We drove in silence, as we always had. Kashani spent the ride looking at his phone, occasionally glancing out the window. Nothing in his demeanor suggested this was anything but another routine ride home. As we approached Oak Street, my anxiety peaked. What would happen next? Would agents swarm the car? Would there be gunfire? Would this quiet man in my back seat reveal himself to be the monster Mercer claimed? "Just ahead on the right," Kashani directed, pointing to a high-end retail store with large display windows. I pulled to the curb, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "Wait here, please," he said, stepping out with his messenger bag. "I won't be long." I watched as he entered the store, speaking briefly to a salesperson who nodded and led him toward the back. Through the windows, I could see them stop at a jewelry counter. Confusion replaced fear. This wasn't the handoff of a dirty bomb. This was shopping? 5 minutes later, Kashani emerged, the messenger bag still with him, but now also carrying a small shopping bag with the store's logo. He slid back into the cab. "Uptown now, please," my usual address. As we drove north, I couldn't contain my curiosity any longer. "Special occasion?" I asked, nodding toward the shopping bag, trying to keep my voice casual. Kashani smiled, the first time I'd seen him do so. "Anniversary," he said. 5 years today. I'm surprising my wife with earrings she's been admiring." "Congratulations," I managed, my mind racing. Was this all an elaborate cover, or had Mercer been wrong? When we reached his uptown apartment building, Kashani paid his fare with his usual generous tip and exited the cab. I watched him walk to the entrance, where he paused, looked at his watch, then continued inside. No federal agents appeared. No tactical teams swarmed the building. Just an ordinary man returning home on a Friday evening with a gift for his wife. I sat in stunned silence for several minutes before my dispatch radio crackled again. Not a fare request this time, but a message. "Proceed to Ravenswood and Wilson. Park and wait." When I arrived at the designated corner, a sedan with tinted windows pulled alongside my cab. The back window lowered to reveal Mercer's impassive face. "Well done, David," he said. "The operation was a success." "What operation?" I demanded. "He bought jewelry for his wife. There was no bomb, no terrorist plot." Mercer's expression didn't change. The weight of the messenger bag decreased by approximately 340 grams between the time he entered the store and returned to your cab. The jewelry he purchased weighs less than 30 grams. So the remainder was left behind, transferred to a dead drop location within the store. A USB drive containing classified defense information that Kashani has been systematically removing from his workplace at a government contractor facility. Not radioactive material, as I may have led you to believe. The realization hit me like a physical blow. You lied to me about all of it. I provided the motivation you needed to cooperate, Mercer corrected. Had I told you it was an espionage case rather than terrorism, would you have felt the same urgency, the same necessity? Before I could respond, he tossed another envelope through the window. The remainder of your compensation, as promised. Your country thanks you for your service, even if you can never speak of it. As his car pulled away, I sat holding the envelope, feeling neither heroic nor relieved, just used. I never saw Kashani again. His regular Thursday and Friday rides stopped abruptly. Sometimes I drive past his uptown building and wonder what happened to him, whether he was arrested quietly, or turned, or simply disappeared. As for Mercer, I catch glimpses of him occasionally, or think I do. A figure watching from a parked car as I pick up a fare. A man reading a newspaper at a cafe as I drive past. A shadow at the edge of my peripheral vision that vanishes when I turn to look. 23 years behind the wheel now, and I still drive the night shift. But I'm more careful about the passengers I accept, more attentive to the conversations I overhear, more aware that in this city of millions, there are watchers in the shadows, players in games most of us never see. And sometimes, when a well-dressed stranger slides into my back seat late at night, I find myself studying their reflection in my rearview mirror, looking for pale, colorless eyes that see too much and reveal nothing at all. The Caldwell Library stood like a sentinel at the heart of Westlake University's campus. 5 stories of stone and glass, housing over 1 million books across its vast collection. I'd been working there as a graduate assistant for nearly 8 months, mostly handling the evening shift that few students wanted. The pay was decent, the hours quiet, and it gave me ample time to work on my dissertation when no one needed assistance. The library had been built in 1924, renovated twice since then, but still retained that dignified academic atmosphere that only comes with age. High ceilings with intricate woodwork, long windows that let in strips of golden light during the day, and row after row of towering bookshelves that created a maze of knowledge. During busy hours, the main floor hummed with the quiet energy of hundreds of students. But after 10 p.m., when I was often alone, aside from a handful of dedicated night owls, the building transformed. That's when you could feel the weight of all those books, all that accumulated knowledge, and the silence between the stacks became almost physical. The building would settle and creak. Pipes would occasionally clang as the heating system cycled, and shadows seemed to deepen between the shelves. Nothing supernatural, just the natural ambience of an old building at night. At least, that's what I told myself. I started noticing the anomalies in February. Small things at first, books rearranged on carts I was certain I'd organized. Study rooms I'd locked being unlocked in the morning. Lights I'd turned off mysteriously on. I assumed it was just the morning staff making changes without logging them, or perhaps my own fatigue causing me to misremember. Graduate school has a way of making you doubt your own memory when you're running on 4 hours of sleep and too much caffeine. The library's 5th floor housed the special collections, rare manuscripts and historical documents that required special permission to access. It was my least favorite area to patrol during closing, not because it was particularly creepy, but because the layout was confusing with its smaller rooms branching off from narrow corridors. The temperature was kept cooler there to preserve the materials, and the lighting was dimmer to prevent damage. Just before closing each night, I'd walk the entire floor, checking for stragglers and securing each room. Dr. Whitman, the head librarian, had warned me during training that the fifth floor was strictly off limits after hours unless accompanied by senior staff. The materials are simply too valuable, she'd explained. Some of those manuscripts are worth more than what either of us will earn in our lifetime. I never questioned the rule. It made perfect sense. The first truly unsettling incident happened on a Wednesday in early March. Campus was quieter than usual due to midterms week. Many students preferred to study in their dorms or the 24-hour student center during exams. I was shelving returns in the American literature section when I heard what sounded like typing from several rows over. Following the sound, I found a young woman I'd never seen before, furiously taking notes on her laptop. She wore a dated outfit, a high-necked blouse and long skirt that looked like something from a period drama. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and large round glasses perched on her nose. I assumed she was part of the theater department, perhaps in costume for a production. "Excuse me," I said, "we're closing in 15 minutes. She didn't respond or look up, just continued typing with intense focus. I cleared my throat and stepped closer. "Miss, the library closes at midnight." When she finally looked up, her eyes had an unsettling intensity that made me take an involuntary step back. "I'm aware of the hours," she said in a clipped tone. "I have special permission from Dr. Hargrove to continue my research." I frowned. Dr. Hargrove hasn't worked here in over a year. He retired last spring. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Confusion, perhaps alarm, but then she smiled tightly. "I meant Dr. Whitman, of course. Simple mistake." Something felt off, but I nodded and moved on to finish my rounds. When I returned 20 minutes later to lock up that section, she was gone. No sign of her laptop or notes, not even a chair pulled out. Just perfectly aligned books and empty tables. The next day, I asked Dr. Whitman if she'd given anyone special permission to stay after hours. "Absolutely not," she said firmly. "You know the policy. No exceptions, especially during exam weeks when students might get desperate for extra time." I described the young woman, including her distinctive vintage clothing. Dr. Whitman's expression changed subtly. "What did you say she was researching?" "She didn't say. She was in American literature, though." She nodded slowly, then changed the subject, asking about my progress cataloging the new acquisitions. Later that day, I noticed her in deep conversation with the university's security director. When they saw me watching, they quickly separated. That weekend, I was shelving in the reference section when I came across an old university yearbook from 1972. I don't know what compelled me to open it. Curiosity, perhaps, or simple boredom. I flipped through pages of dated hairstyles and wide-lapelled suits until I froze, my blood running cold. There she was, the same woman I'd seen that night, identified as Margaret Keller, doctoral candidate English. The resemblance was uncanny, same severe hairstyle, same intense eyes behind round glasses. But this yearbook was over 50 years old. Chapter 5. I became obsessed with learning about Margaret Keller. Using the university's archives, I discovered she had been working on her dissertation about obscure American Gothic literature when she disappeared in the spring of 1973. The campus newspaper reported that she was last seen entering the library late one evening. Her belongings were found at her study carrel the next morning, but Margaret was never found. The official theory was that she'd had a mental breakdown from the pressure of her dissertation and had run away. But her family insisted she would never abandon her research. The case eventually went cold. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow seen her ghost, though I'd never believed in such things. I began staying later after my shifts, exploring the quietest corners of the library. If I had seen Margaret, or someone who looked remarkably like her, I wanted to understand why. My rational mind insisted there must be a logical explanation. Perhaps a student researching Margaret was dressing like her, or maybe I'd seen the yearbook previously and my tired brain had constructed a false memory. One night in April, I was cross-referencing catalog records when I found a discrepancy. There was an entire collection of rare Gothic literature that appeared in the 1972 catalog, but was missing from current records. According to the old system, these books had been housed in a small room on the 5th floor, a room that, as far as I knew, was now used for storage. That night, after ensuring everyone had left the building, I broke protocol and took the elevator to the 5th floor. The storage room was at the end of a narrow corridor, its door labeled simply 5J in faded lettering. My master key worked, though the lock turned reluctantly, as if it hadn't been used in years. Inside, instead of storage, I found a small, perfectly preserved study room. A heavy wooden table sat in the center, surrounded by glass-fronted bookcases filled with aged volumes. A layer of dust covered everything, but not nearly enough for a room supposedly unused for decades. Someone had been here, and recently. On the table lay an open notebook, its pages filled with dense, handwritten notes in faded ink. Next to it sat a modern ballpoint pen. I recognized the handwriting immediately from catalog cards Margaret had filled out. I'd seen them in the archive, but the pen couldn't have been hers. The model hadn't existed in 1973. As I leaned closer to examine the notebook, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath clouded in front of me, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I heard the rapid click of typewriter keys, though there was no typewriter in the room. "You shouldn't be here," came a voice from behind me, the same clipped tone I'd heard before. "This research is mine." I turned slowly to see Margaret standing in the doorway, looking exactly as she had before, except now I could see through her slightly to the bookshelves behind. Her form wavered like heat rising from pavement. "Margaret Keller?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Her eyes widened in surprise. "You know me? You disappeared in 1973. People looked for you." She shook her head dismissively. "I didn't disappear. I'm completing my dissertation. I've nearly finished the research phase." She gestured to the notebook. "I found connections no one else has documented between early American Gothic writers and their European influences." "Margaret," I said gently, "it's 2025. You've been gone for over 50 years. She stared at me, then laughed, a harsh sound that echoed strangely in the small room. "That's absurd. I was just speaking with Dr. Hargrove yesterday about my progress." I took a step toward her, and she flickered like a bad television signal. "What happened to you?" I asked. "What happened that night?" Her form stabilized, and something like awareness crept into her expression. "I found something," she whispered, glancing at the bookshelves. In an uncatalogued volume, a personal journal of Charles Brockden Brown. It contained a passage that couldn't possibly be real, a description of his own death, written before it happened. I stayed late to transcribe it, and then... She looked down at herself, seeming to notice her translucent state for the first time. Horror crossed her features. "No," she murmured. "No, that can't be right." The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped further. Books began to shake on their shelves. "You need to leave," Margaret said urgently. "It's still here. It doesn't want to be discovered." I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut. The notebook on the table flipped open, pages turning rapidly as if caught in a wind I couldn't feel. They stopped on a page containing a single sentence repeated over and over. "Time is circular in the archives." "What is this?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "What's happening?" Margaret's form grew more solid as she approached me. "The knowledge in this room exists outside of time. I thought I'd discovered something revolutionary, but I became part of it instead." She gestured to the pen on the table. "Others have found their way here over the years. They leave things behind, but they can't leave themselves." I lunged for the door, pulling frantically at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The lights flickered more violently now, and I could hear whispers emanating from the books, overlapping voices discussing theories and concepts I couldn't understand. "Your key," Margaret said. "Use your key. You can still leave if you hurry." My hands shaking, I fumbled with my master key and jammed it into the lock. As I turned it, Margaret appeared beside me, more solid than ever. "If you make it out," she whispered, "tell them to seal this room. Some knowledge isn't meant to be found." The lock finally gave way, and I stumbled into the corridor. Behind me, I heard the voices rising to a crescendo, and Margaret's among them, first pleading, then screaming. I ran to the elevator, jabbing frantically at the button for the main floor. As the doors began to close, I caught a final glimpse of the corridor. Margaret stood there watching me, her form now completely solid. Behind her, other figures had appeared, men and women in clothing from different eras, all with the same intense, hollow-eyed stare. And they were walking toward the elevator. The doors closed just in time. When I reached the main floor, I triggered the fire alarm and fled the building. The university investigated, of course. They found room 5J exactly as it had been for decades. A simple storage closet filled with old equipment. No books, no table, no notebook. They attributed my experience to stress and overwork, maybe even carbon monoxide from the old heating system. Whitman suggested I take a leave of absence. I resigned instead. But before I left, I checked one last thing: the university's current student directory. There, listed among the graduate students in the English department, was my own name, with a note indicating I was working on a dissertation about obscure American Gothic literature, just like Margaret had been 50 years before. Sometimes I dream of that room and of Margaret's warning. In my dreams, I'm sitting at that wooden table, writing the same sentence over and over. Time is circular in the archives. And I'm waiting for someone to find me. My mother always warned me to be aware of my surroundings. "Keep your keys between your fingers when walking to your car," she'd say. "Check the back seat before getting in. Park under streetlights." I'd roll my eyes, thinking she was being paranoid. At 24, I'd lived in Minneapolis my entire life and never once felt threatened. That Tuesday started like any other. I woke up, made coffee, and scrolled through emails before heading to my job at the advertising agency downtown. The day dragged on. Client meetings, deadlines, the usual stress. By evening, I was exhausted and still needed to stop for groceries on my way home. It was nearly 9 p.m. when I pulled into the Superfresh parking lot. The store was open 24 hours, but the lot was half empty this late. I parked in my usual spot about midway down the row, under one of the bright overhead lights. Force of habit from my mother's warnings, I suppose. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I grabbed a basket and moved mechanically through my routine. Produce first, then dairy, canned goods, frozen items last. The store was quiet, just a few other late-night shoppers and tired employees stocking shelves. I nodded politely to the cashier, Maya, according to her name tag, as I paid for my groceries. "Cold one tonight," she remarked, handing me my receipt. "Yeah, winter's coming early this year," I replied with the practiced small talk of strangers. "Be careful out there," she added, and something in her tone made me look up. She was glancing past me toward the store entrance, a slight frown on her face. I turned to follow her gaze, but saw nothing unusual. Just the automatic doors opening for an elderly couple leaving the store. I shrugged it off and headed out, my mind already on the hot shower and glass of wine waiting for me at home. The automatic doors whooshed open, releasing me into the cold October air. My breath formed small clouds as I walked toward my car, grocery bags weighing down my arms. It was just another Tuesday night. Until it wasn't. I first noticed him as I was loading groceries into my trunk. Just a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the feeling of being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to appear casual. A man was sitting in a dark blue sedan about 4 spaces away, facing my direction. I couldn't make out his features clearly in the darkness, but I could see the glow of a phone screen illuminating the lower half of his face. He seemed to be looking down at it, not at me. Just another shopper, probably checking messages before heading home. Still, something felt off. The car was running. I could see exhaust in the cold air, but he wasn't moving, just sitting there. How long had he been there? Had he been in the store? I couldn't remember seeing him inside. I pushed the uneasiness away. This was what happened when you let your mother's paranoia seep into your subconscious. I was creating threats where none existed. The man was probably waiting for someone, or maybe using the store's Wi-Fi to check emails. Perfectly innocent. I closed my trunk and pushed my cart to the return area, stealing another glance at the blue sedan. The man was still there, still illuminated by his phone. As I walked back to my driver's side door, I kept my keys between my fingers, just like my mother taught me. An old habit, nothing more. Inside my car, I locked the doors immediately, another habit, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I was being ridiculous. I started the engine, cranked up the heat, and began backing out of my spot. As I shifted into drive, I noticed the blue sedan's headlights turn on. It pulled out of its space, heading toward the exit. See, just another shopper finishing up, heading home like me. Nothing to worry about. I turned right out of the parking lot toward my apartment about 15 minutes away. In my rearview mirror, I saw the blue sedan turn right as well. Lots of people live in this direction, I told myself. The uneasy feeling persisted. The drive home followed my usual route. Main road for a few miles, then through a residential area, finally onto the street where my apartment complex stood. I tried to focus on the podcast playing through my car speakers, but my attention kept drifting to my rearview mirror. The blue sedan was still behind me, maintaining a consistent distance of about 3 car lengths. It had followed the same turns I had, all 3 of them. My heartbeat quickened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Minneapolis wasn't that big, and this was a common route. The fact that we were going the same way didn't mean anything sinister. Still, I decided to test my theory. At the next intersection, instead of continuing straight as I normally would, I made a right turn. The blue sedan followed. I made an immediate left into a neighborhood I didn't normally drive through. The sedan turned left as well. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles whitening. This was no coincidence. The car was following me. I tried to remember what I'd learned in a self-defense class years ago. Stay in public areas. Don't drive home. Lead them to a police station instead. But the nearest police station was across town, and I wasn't entirely sure which direction. My apartment was only 5 minutes away now, with a secured building entrance and neighbors who would hear me if I screamed. I made another random turn, this time into a cul-de-sac. It was a desperate move. If the sedan followed me in, I'd be trapped. But I needed to be certain. The sedan slowed at the entrance to the cul-de-sac, but didn't turn in. Instead, it drove past slowly, and I caught a glimpse of the driver looking my way. Just the silhouette of a head, turning to watch me. I waited until the car disappeared from view, then quickly turned around and headed back toward the main road, my breathing rapid and shallow. Maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe he'd just been lost, checking directions, and coincidentally taking the same route. I turned onto the main road again, heading toward my apartment. 3 blocks later, I noticed headlights behind me again. The blue sedan had reappeared, keeping the same 3-car length distance. My momentary relief evaporated. This wasn't in my head. This was real. I was now less than a mile from my apartment, my usual sanctuary reduced to a terrible destination. I couldn't go home, not with him following me. He would know where I lived. Think, I told myself. What were my options? The police station was too far. I could call 911, but what would I say? Someone's following me in a blue sedan. It wasn't illegal to drive behind someone, and I had no evidence of any crime. By the time police arrived, it might be too late. I could drive to a public place, a bar or restaurant, but most places were closing soon, and the parking lots would be emptying. The gas station, maybe? There was a 24-hour Quick Trip just ahead. It wouldn't be crowded this late, but at least there would be witnesses, cameras. I signaled and turned into the Quick Trip parking lot, pulling up directly in front of the store's glass windows. The blue sedan drove past slowly, then circled back and pulled into the lot, parking several spaces away from me. Under the bright lights of the gas station, I could see the driver more clearly now. A man, perhaps in his 30s, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore a dark jacket and appeared remarkably ordinary. Not some movie villain or stereotypical creep, just a normal-looking man who had been following me for 15 minutes. I killed my engine but didn't get out. I could see the store clerk inside, the young man stocking cigarettes behind the counter. One other customer was at the register, an older woman paying for gas. Not much help if things went badly. My phone showed only 12% battery, enough to call for help, but not enough to waste. I needed a plan. I could go inside, tell the clerk what was happening, ask to stay until the man left. But what if he just waited? What if he followed me when I eventually left? A text message appeared on my screen. My roommate Julie. Grab dinner with Mark, staying at his place tonight. See you tomorrow. Great. Even if I made it home, I'd be alone in the apartment. The man would know that. I glanced at the blue sedan. The driver was still inside, his face now illuminated by the overhead lights of the gas station. He was watching me. Not pretending to check his phone anymore, not trying to be subtle, just staring directly at me. And then he smiled, a slow, deliberate curl of the lips. A smile that said, "I see you. I know you're afraid." I had to make a decision. Now, my instinct was to stay in the locked car, but that would just prolong the standoff. Eventually, I'd have to leave, and he knew that. I had to change the dynamic. I pulled my phone out and made a show of holding it up, pointing at him, pretending to take his picture. I didn't actually take one. My battery was too low to waste, but I wanted him to think I had evidence of him following me. Then I did something I never thought I would do. I called my ex-boyfriend, Derek. We'd broken up 6 months ago after 3 years together. It hadn't ended well, but he lived nearby and was the only person I could think of who might help. "Hello?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Derek, it's me. I need help." My voice cracked slightly. "Someone's following me. I'm at the Quick Trip on Lexington." There was a pause, then rustling sounds. "I'll be there in 5 minutes. Stay where there are people." I hung up, oddly comforted by his immediate response despite our history. 5 minutes. I could handle 5 minutes. The man was still watching me, his smile gone now. He must have realized I'd called someone. Good. I wanted him to know help was coming, but then he did something unexpected. He got out of his car. My heart dropped as he began walking toward me. Average height, average build, dressed in jeans and a dark jacket. So terribly ordinary, except for the intent in his eyes. Panic surged through me. I couldn't stay in the car. I'd be trapped. I needed to get inside the store, with witnesses and cameras. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and opened my door. As I stepped out, I kept my keys between my fingers and my phone ready to dial 911. I locked eyes with the man, wanting him to know I wasn't afraid, a lie, and that I saw him, the truth. "Can I help you with something?" I called out, loud enough for the clerk inside to hear. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The man stopped, seemingly surprised by my directness. "I think you dropped something in the supermarket parking lot," he said, his voice calm and reasonable. "I was trying to return it to you." I didn't move closer. "What did I drop?" He reached into his pocket and my grip tightened on my keys. He pulled out something small, a wallet. My wallet, the one that should have been in my purse. "Is this yours?" he asked, holding it up. "I saw it fall when you were loading your groceries. I tried to catch up to you in the parking lot, but you drove off before I could reach you." My mind raced. Was this possible? I fumbled for my purse, unzipped the inner pocket where I always kept my wallet. Empty. The man took a step closer, still holding out the wallet. I opened it to check the ID, to make sure I was following the right person. "I'm sorry if I scared you." I stared at him, conflicted. Could this all be an innocent misunderstanding? A good Samaritan returning my wallet? But the smile at the gas station, that hadn't seemed helpful or friendly. "Just leave it on the ground and step back," I said, still not trusting him. "Please." He shrugged and bent down, placing the wallet on the asphalt. Then he straightened and took several steps backward, hands raised slightly to show he meant no harm. I moved forward cautiously, never taking my eyes off him. I snatched the wallet from the ground and quickly verified it was mine. Everything seemed to be in place. Credit cards, driver's license, the $43 in cash I'd had. "Thank you," I said hesitantly, still maintaining my distance. "No problem," he replied, then added, "You should be more careful. Not everyone who would find your wallet would return it." The way he said it, not as friendly advice, but almost like a threat, made my skin crawl again. I backed toward the store entrance, unwilling to turn my back on him. "My boyfriend's on his way," I said, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "He'll be here any minute." The man's expression changed, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes, a hardening of the jaw. Like I said, just trying to help. He turned and walked back toward his car. I watched him go, relief flooding through me as he got into the blue sedan. But he didn't drive away. He just sat there, engine running, watching me. Chapter 6. The truth. As I stood awkwardly halfway between my car and the store entrance, headlights swept across the parking lot. Derek's familiar black Honda pulled in and parked next to my car. I'd never been so happy to see that car in my life. Derek got out immediately, scanning the area until he spotted me. "What's going on?" he asked, hurrying over. "Are you okay?" The concern in his voice nearly broke me. I nodded toward the blue sedan. "That guy's been following me since the grocery store. He says he was returning my wallet, that I dropped it." Derek turned to look at the sedan, his body language shifting to protective mode. Despite our breakup, seeing him ready to defend me brought a rush of complicated emotions. "Did he give you the wallet?" Derek asked. "Yes," I admitted, showing him. "Everything's still in it." Derek frowned, processing this. "So maybe he was telling the truth?" I started to nod, then stopped. But something felt off. He was watching me in the store parking lot, following me for miles. And when I looked at him here, he smiled, not a friendly smile. It was predatory. Derek stood beside me, deliberating. Then he walked toward the blue sedan, ignoring my whispered protest. I watched nervously as he approached the driver's side and gestured for the man to roll down his window. They spoke briefly, the conversation appearing civil from where I stood. Then Derek turned and walked back to me. "He says he was trying to return your wallet," Derek confirmed. "Says he tried calling out to you in the parking lot, but you didn't hear him, so he followed you. When you started making random turns, he realized you thought he was stalking you, so he kept his distance." Put that way, it sounded reasonable. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe my mother's warnings had made me paranoid. "Did you check all the compartments in your wallet?" Derek asked suddenly. I frowned, opening my wallet again. Credit cards, cash, ID. Wait, there was a small pocket in the back where I kept an old photo. A candid shot of me laughing at a party last year. It was gone. "There was a picture here," I said slowly. "It's missing." Derek's expression darkened. Without another word, he turned and walked back to the blue sedan, more purposefully this time. I couldn't hear what was said, but I saw Derek's posture change, becoming more aggressive. The man in the sedan gestured dismissively, then shifted to drive. As the car began to move, Derek reached through the window and grabbed something. A piece of paper. The car accelerated away, tires squealing as it exited the parking lot. Derek walked back to me, holding what I now recognized as my missing photograph. But it wasn't alone. Attached to it with a paperclip was a small scrap of paper with my address written on it, information he could only have gotten from my driver's license. And beneath it, 2 words, "See you." Chapter 7. The Aftermath. Derek insisted I couldn't go home that night. We drove to the police station in separate cars, where I filed a report with a tired-looking officer who took notes but didn't seem particularly alarmed. No crime had technically been committed. The man had returned my wallet after all. The note was creepy but not explicitly threatening. "We'll keep an eye out for the vehicle," the officer promised, "but there's not much we can do unless he actually does something." I left feeling frustrated and vulnerable. The system wasn't designed to prevent crimes, only to respond to them after they happened. Derek followed me to his apartment, where I would stay for the night. On the way, I called my roommate Julie to explain the situation. "Oh my God," she gasped. "That's terrifying. Want me to come home?" "No," I assured her. "I'm staying at Derek's tonight. But maybe we should both look for a new place. He knows our address." In Derek's apartment, the familiar surroundings brought back a flood of memories, both good and bad. We had loved each other once, before disagreements about the future drove us apart. Now, circumstance had thrown us back together. "You can take the bed," he offered. "I'll sleep on the couch." As I lay in his bed that night, surrounded by the scent of him on the sheets, I couldn't stop thinking about the man in the blue sedan. Had he really just been returning my wallet? If so, why keep my photo? Why write down my address? Why follow me for so long instead of just calling out to me in the parking lot? The answer seemed obvious and terrifying. He had been hunting, not helping. My wallet had been an opportunity, not his original intent, and now he knew where I lived. Sleep eluded me as I stared at the ceiling, my mind cycling through dark possibilities. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope you got home safe. Thanks for the picture. You have a beautiful smile." My blood ran cold. I showed the message to Derek, who immediately called the police again. They took another report but explained that the number was likely a burner phone, untraceable. "Change your locks," the officer advised over the phone. "Consider a restraining order if he makes contact again." A restraining order. A piece of paper that wouldn't stop a determined stalker. Cold comfort in the dead of night. 3 weeks have passed since that night. I haven't seen the blue sedan again, but I feel its presence everywhere, in every car that drives too slowly past our building, in every unfamiliar face I glimpse on my street, in every unknown number that calls my phone. Julie and I found a new apartment in a secured building across town. We didn't put our names on the mailbox or the directory. I changed my route to work, my grocery store, my gym. I carry pepper spray now and have taken real self-defense classes. My mother's warnings no longer seem paranoid. They seem insufficient. Derek and I have been talking again. The night at his apartment led to conversations about what went wrong between us. Apologies on both sides. I'm not sure where it's heading, but his presence makes me feel safer. The police never found the man in the blue sedan. The officer assigned to my case said this happens sometimes. Predators test boundaries, looking for vulnerability, then move on to easier targets when they meet resistance. He meant it to be reassuring, but the thought that the man is still out there, perhaps stalking someone else, haunts me. I check my rearview mirror constantly now. I notice when the same car makes the same turns I do. I'm aware of men watching me in public spaces in a way I never was before. This heightened vigilance is exhausting but necessary. Last night, I dreamed of the supermarket parking lot. In the dream, I looked up to see the man from the blue sedan standing directly in front of me, holding my wallet, smiling that same predatory smile. "You dropped something," he said, but when I looked down, it wasn't my wallet he was holding. It was a key, my house key. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. Derek stirred beside me. He stays over most nights now, another layer of protection. "Bad dream?" he murmured sleepily. "Yeah," I whispered, "just a bad dream." But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to Derek's breathing slow back into sleep, I knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning from my subconscious, a reminder to stay alert. Because the most terrifying thing about that night wasn't what happened, it was what could have happened. What might still happen if I let my guard down. That's the thing about predators. They're patient. They wait for the perfect moment. The moment when you forget to check your rearview mirror, when you walk distracted to your car, when you drop your wallet in a poorly lit parking lot. I won't be that woman. Not anymore. The girl who rolled her eyes at her mother's warnings died in that supermarket parking lot. In her place is someone stronger, someone vigilant, someone who knows that the monsters aren't hiding under the bed. They're driving blue sedans and returning wallets and smiling in ways that don't reach their eyes. Every morning before I leave the apartment, I check the peephole. Every night before I sleep, I check the locks twice. And every time I walk to my car, I hold my keys between my fingers, just like my mother taught me. Not paranoid, prepared. I've always found solace in evening walks. There's something about the transition between day and night that quiets my mind. The way shadows lengthen, how sounds become more distinct yet somehow muffled. The hillside trail near my apartment in Northern California had been my sanctuary since moving here 3 months ago. That evening, October 12th, was unusually cold. The weather report had warned of an early cold snap, but I dismissed it, throwing on just a light jacket over my running clothes. The setting sun painted the western sky in fierce oranges and purples as I locked my car and headed toward the trailhead. Trail closes at sunset, the faded sign warned. I checked my watch. 6:47 p.m. Sunset wasn't for another 20 minutes, which gave me just enough time for a quick out and back to the first lookout point. Just enough time to clear my head after the day I'd had. The trail began gently enough, winding through scrub brush and scattered oak trees. During daylight hours, this path would be dotted with hikers, dog walkers, and amateur photographers. But now, with darkness approaching, I had the place to myself. The silence was exactly what I needed after the chaos at work, the layoffs, the tears, the awkward goodbyes. I'd survived the cuts, but survivor's guilt weighed heavily. As I rounded the first bend, the lights of the town fell away, and the full silence of the hillside enveloped me like a blanket. Just me, my footsteps, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. The path narrowed as it climbed, becoming steeper, rockier. I should have brought my trail runners instead of these worn-out sneakers. Still, I pressed on, my breath forming small clouds in the increasingly chilly air. The light was fading faster than I'd anticipated, the hills to the west accelerating sunset's timeline. My phone buzzed. A text from my roommate. Grabbed dinner without you. Hope that's okay. I tapped back a quick, no problem, and checked the time, 6:58 p.m. The lookout point was just ahead. I'd take a quick moment to enjoy the view, then head back before full darkness set in. The lookout was a simple wooden platform extending slightly over the hillside, offering a panoramic view of the valley below. On clear days, you could see all the way to the mountains on the horizon. Now, with dusk settling in, the town lights twinkled below like fallen stars, while the sky above darkened to deep indigo. I took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill my lungs. This was worth it, despite the chill seeping through my inadequate jacket. Worth it to find a moment's peace in the chaos of life. That's when I heard it, a sound behind me on the trail, a footstep, deliberate and heavy, then another. I turned, squinting into the gathering darkness. "Hello?" My voice sounded small against the vastness of the hillside. No response, but the footsteps stopped. "Is someone there?" I called, louder this time. Only the whisper of wind through the scrub oak answered me. I shook my head, laughing nervously at my jumpiness. Probably just a deer or coyote on the trail. Still, a prickle of unease ran down my spine. The darkness seemed to be falling unnaturally quickly now, and the temperature with it. Time to head back. I moved quickly down the trail, my earlier leisurely pace replaced by something more purposeful. The path, familiar on the way up, now seemed transformed by shadows. Every bush and rock formation took on menacing silhouettes in the fading light. The sound came again, a footstep, distinct from my own. I froze, listening intently. There it was again, the unmistakable crunch of shoes on gravel, falling silent when I stopped moving. "I know someone's there," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "The trail's closing, we should both head back." Silence stretched out, heavy and oppressive. Then, a rustle from the bushes about 20 yards back. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness but illuminated nothing unusual on the path behind me. Just rocks, dirt, and the occasional scrubby plant. I started walking again, faster now, keeping my phone light trained on the path. The uneven ground made running dangerous, but I moved as quickly as I dared. The sounds continued, now unmistakably footsteps, matching my pace, always maintaining the same distance. "This isn't funny," I shouted, my voice cracking slightly. The footsteps paused momentarily, then resumed, perhaps even closer. The trail curved sharply ahead, and as I rounded the bend, my light caught something that made me stumble. A single boot print in a patch of mud, much larger than my shoe, with a distinctive zigzag tread pattern. Fresh, heading in the same direction I was. I wasn't imagining things. Someone was deliberately following me. The realization hit me like ice water. I wasn't alone on this trail, and whoever was behind me was playing some kind of game. My mind raced through possibilities. Another hiker who found my fear amusing? A park ranger checking for stragglers? Or something worse? I picked up my pace again, nearly jogging now, despite the treacherous footing. The main parking lot was still a good 10 minutes away, assuming I didn't fall. My phone showed 7:21 p.m., full darkness now, the only illumination coming from my phone's flashlight and the faint glow of the town far below. The footsteps behind me quickened too. No longer trying to hide their presence, they matched my increased speed. A branch snapped loudly, closer than before. Too close. My heart pounding in my throat, I made a split-second decision. About 50 yards ahead, a smaller trail branched off from the main path, a maintenance access route that cut more directly down the hillside. It was steeper and rougher, but it would get me to the secondary parking lot faster. More importantly, it might throw off whoever was following me. As I approached the junction, I slowed slightly, feigning fatigue. Then, at the last moment, I switched off my phone light and darted down the side trail, moving as quietly as possible despite my panicked breathing. I counted to 20 before risking turning my light back on, pointing it downward to minimize visibility. The side trail was as rough as I remembered, more of a water runoff than a proper path, studded with loose rocks and exposed roots. I picked my way down carefully, straining to hear over my own movements. For a blissful minute, I heard nothing but the sound of my own careful descent. Then, a curse, loud and angry, from the main trail. He, the voice was definitely male, had lost sight of me. I had maybe a minute before he'd find the turnoff. I moved faster, recklessly now, half sliding down the steepest sections. My ankle twisted painfully on a hidden rock, but adrenaline kept me moving. The secondary lot was visible now, perhaps 200 yards away, where my roommate's boyfriend sometimes parked when the main lot was full. The parking lot had a single security light, its yellow glow the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. But the lot appeared empty. No cars, no people. I'd have to keep going, down to the main road. Behind me, a shout echoed across the hillside. "I see you!" Terror propelled me forward. I abandoned all pretense of stealth, scrambling and sliding down the final portion of the trail toward the empty parking lot. My ankle throbbed with each impact, threatening to give way entirely. The security light illuminated the small gravel lot in sickly yellow, and revealed something I'd missed from above. A dark sedan parked in the farthest corner, almost hidden by shadows. Hope surged within me. I changed course, heading directly for the vehicle. "Hey!" I shouted, waving frantically. "Help! Please!" As I drew closer, I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. The dome light flicked on as the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, his face momentarily obscured by the contrast of light and shadow. "Are you okay?" he called, his voice calm, concerned. "Someone's following me," I gasped, limping the final few yards to the car. "On the trail. He's been stalking me." As I reached the car, the man stepped fully into the security light's glow. He wore hiking boots with a distinctive tread, the same pattern I'd seen in the mud on the trail. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No one's following you," he said softly. "I've been waiting here the whole time." I froze, the realization crashing over me. He hadn't been behind me on the trail. He'd been ahead of me, watching, planning. He'd circled back somehow, driving to this lower lot while I frantically fled downhill. The entire time I thought I was escaping, I was running directly toward him. As he took a step toward me, I noticed something in his hand catching the yellow light. A thin zip tie, the kind used by police for temporary restraints. In that moment, clarity cut through my panic. I wasn't helpless, and this wasn't over. I'd spent years taking self-defense classes after an incident in college. My phone was still clutched in my hand, the flashlight beam pointed at the ground. With deliberate calm that belied my racing heart, I raised the light directly into his eyes, temporarily blinding him. In that split second of advantage, I made my choice. Not fight, but flight. I pivoted and sprinted toward the main road, my twisted ankles screaming in protest. Behind me, I heard him curse, then the sound of footsteps giving chase. But I had something he didn't, the knowledge of exactly what was at stake. I ran like I never had before, my lungs burning, legs pumping, the sound of traffic on the main road growing louder with each step. I broke through the tree line just as a pair of headlights rounded the corner. I lurched into the road, waving my arms frantically, my phone's light swinging wildly. The car, a pizza delivery vehicle, screeched to a halt inches from me. The young driver rolled down his window, eyes wide with shock. Before he could speak, I yanked open the passenger door and threw myself inside. "Drive," I gasped. "Please just drive, call the police." As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse in the side mirror. A figure at the edge of the trees, watching before melting back into the darkness of the hillside. I never walked those trails again. Police searched but found nothing except boot prints that matched my description. Sometimes I wonder if he's still there, waiting on those darkened paths. Sometimes I wake up certain I hear footsteps, matching my pace, drawing closer in the darkness. And that's the true terror. Not what happened, but what almost happened. How the simple decision to take an evening walk nearly led me down a path from which there would have been no return. The fluorescent lights of room 237 buzzed overhead, That persistent electrical hum that becomes noticeable only when everything else falls quiet. And Westridge Community College on a Friday night was very, very quiet. I glanced at my watch. 9:47 p.m. The campus had officially closed at 9, but Professor Hargrove had given me special permission to use the biology lab to finish my semester project. A comprehensive analysis of local water samples that I'd been putting off for weeks. "Just make sure you lock up when you leave, Marcus," he'd said, dropping the faculty keycard into my palm with noticeable reluctance. "And for God's sake, don't tell anyone I let you stay after hours. The administration would have my head." I nodded eagerly, grateful for the opportunity to salvage my grade. The project was due Monday, and I needed these uninterrupted hours to complete my work. The microscope slides were spread before me in neat rows, half-analyzed water samples waiting for my attention. Outside the windows, darkness had completely fallen, transforming the glass into black mirrors that reflected the sterile lab interior. I returned to my work, adjusting the microscope, but found myself increasingly distracted by the building's night sounds. During the day, Henley Hall was filled with the noise of hundreds of students, conversations, laughter, the squeaking of sneakers on linoleum. Now, each small sound stood out against the backdrop of silence. The cycling of the heating system, the occasional distant thunk of the old plumbing, the subtle creaks of a building settling for the night. I stretched, rolling my shoulders to release the tension that had built from hunching over the microscope. The coffee I'd brought was long empty, and fatigue was beginning to dull my focus. Just a few more samples, I told myself. Then I could pack up and head back to my apartment. My roommates would be out partying until early morning. I wasn't missing anything by being here. As I reached for the next slide, I heard it. A door closing somewhere down the hallway. Not the heavy metal clang of an exterior door, but the softer sound of one of the interior classroom doors. I froze, listening. The building should be empty. The silence returned, and I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the sound, or that it was just another quirk of the aging building. Henley Hall was one of the oldest structures on campus, built in the late 1960s and showing every year of its age. The heating system alone made enough strange noises to fuel a dozen ghost stories among freshmen. I refocused on my work, carefully recording my observations of the algae growth in the Henderson Creek sample. The next 15 minutes passed without incident, and I started to relax again. Just my imagination, heightened by the unusual experience of being alone in the building. Then I heard footsteps. Unmistakable this time. The measured sound of someone walking slowly down the tiled hallway outside the lab. Not the hurried steps of a security guard making rounds, but unhurried, almost casual, as if whoever it was had every right to be there and all the time in the world. My pulse quickened. I hadn't seen any other cars in the faculty lot when I'd arrived, and the last of the administrative staff had left hours ago. The campus security office was in the administration building across the quad, and they rarely did internal checks of buildings unless alerted to a problem. The footsteps stopped. Right outside the lab door, I stared at the door handle, half expecting it to turn. My phone lay next to my notebook, and I reached for it slowly, not wanting to make any noise. The lab was brightly lit. If someone was in the hallway, they would certainly see the light spilling out from under the door and know that the room was occupied. After what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds, the footsteps resumed, continuing down the hallway until they faded from hearing. I released the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Probably a late working professor, or maybe another student with special permission, I reasoned. Still, an uneasy feeling had settled in my stomach. I decided to pack up my materials and continue the work at home. I could come back in the morning when the building officially opened at 8 a.m. As I began carefully storing the slides, the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Old wiring, I told myself. Nothing unusual. I had just snapped my laptop shut when the building's power failed completely. The room plunged into darkness, so absolute that for a moment I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face. The sudden silence was even more disorienting than the darkness. The background hum of the fluorescent lights and HVAC system had disappeared, leaving a vacuum of sound. "Shit," I muttered, fumbling for my phone. My fingers found it, and I activated the flashlight function. The beam cut through the darkness, casting long, strange shadows from the lab equipment. I knew I needed to leave now. Power outages weren't uncommon on campus. The electrical infrastructure was as old as the buildings. But being stuck alone in a pitch-black science building wasn't my idea of a good Friday night. I gathered my backpack and the faculty key card, then directed my phone light toward the door. The beam caught something unexpected, a small yellow paper that had been slipped under the door while I was working. I hadn't noticed it before. A note from security, perhaps? I crossed the room and picked it up. The paper contained a single sentence in neat block printing. "I know you're alone in there." A cold wave of fear washed over me. I stared at the note, trying to make sense of it. A prank? A warning? I looked up at the door with new apprehension. Suddenly, the power outage didn't seem so routine. I tried the door handle. It turned easily, not locked, but when I pulled, the door didn't budge. I pulled harder, putting my weight into it. Nothing. Something was blocking the door from the outside. I directed my phone light through the narrow window in the upper portion of the door. The hallway beyond was as dark as the lab. My light beam insufficient to illuminate much beyond the immediate area. But what I could see was enough to confirm my fear. The janitor's heavy mop handle had been wedged through the door handle and braced against the opposite wall, effectively barring the door from outside. Someone had deliberately trapped me inside. My heart hammered against my ribs as I processed this realization. This was no accident, no misunderstanding. Someone had seen me in the lab, slipped that note under the door, cut the power, and barricaded me inside. But why? I tried to think logically through my rising panic. The building had other exits. The lab had 2 doors, the main entrance now blocked, and a second door at the back that connected to the adjacent preparation room. From there, I could access the hallway from a different point. I directed my light toward the rear door and moved quickly across the room. This door was kept locked when not in use, a safety precaution for the chemical storage in the prep room, but Professor Hargrove's key card should work. As I reached for the handle, the sound of glass breaking echoed from somewhere in the building. Distant, but distinct. Then another crash, closer. Someone was moving through the building, breaking things as they went, and they seemed to be getting closer to my location. My fingers trembled as I swiped the key card against the reader next to the prep room door. The small light blinked red. I tried again. Red. Again. Red. "Come on," I whispered desperately, swiping once more. This time, the light didn't activate at all. The power outage must have disabled the electronic locks. I was truly trapped now, with someone deliberately hunting me. I killed my phone light and crouched in the darkness, trying to control my panicked breathing. The lab had several potential hiding spots. Underneath the instructor's desk, inside the large storage cabinets along the back wall, behind the chemical shower in the corner. But hiding wouldn't solve my situation. I needed to find a way out or some means of communication. The windows. The lab was on the 2nd floor, but maybe I could signal someone outside or even find a way to climb down if necessary. Before I could move toward them, I heard it. The soft sound of a key card being swiped outside the main lab door, followed by the click of the lock disengaging. Whoever was out there had faculty access. The janitor's handle scraped against the floor as it was removed, and then the door handle turned slowly. I darted to the nearest cabinet, pulling open the door as quietly as possible and folding myself into the cramped space among boxes of latex gloves and safety goggles. Through the narrow gap I left in the cabinet door, I saw the beam of a flashlight sweep into the room. "Marcus?" The voice was male, softly calling. "I know you're still in here. Your backpack is on the table." With horror, I realized I'd left my backpack, with my car keys, wallet, and ID, on the lab table in my rush to hide. The flashlight beam moved methodically around the room, pausing on my abandoned belongings. "This doesn't have to be difficult. I just want to talk to you." I didn't recognize the voice, which somehow made the situation even more terrifying. The beam continued its slow journey around the room, coming closer to my hiding spot. "It's about what you found in the water samples," the voice continued conversationally. "From Henderson Creek? Near the pharmaceutical plant?" My mind raced. The Henderson Creek samples had shown some unusual chemical compositions, nothing I'd fully analyzed yet, but potentially concerning levels of pharmaceutical byproducts that shouldn't have been present. "That data can't leave this room, Marcus. I'm sure you understand why." The flashlight beam passed over my cabinet, then returned, lingering. My heart seemed to stop. "This childish hiding isn't going to change anything," the voice said, now directly in front of my hiding place. "The samples are already destroyed. Your notes will be next. Then we just need to discuss what you've already inferred from your research." The cabinet door was suddenly yanked open, and I found myself staring up at a middle-aged man in a security uniform I didn't recognize. He didn't look like any of the regular campus security guards I'd seen before. His flashlight beam blinded me momentarily. "There you are," he said, his tone almost relieved. "Let's make this simple." In the dim illumination, I could see he was holding something in his other hand. Not a weapon, but a small device that looked like a portable hard drive. "All your data gets transferred to this," he said, indicating the device, "including whatever you've stored in cloud accounts. You sign an NDA that I have right here. Then you switch your research topic to something less problematic. The department will approve whatever alternative you suggest." "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I expected. "You don't work for campus security." He smiled thinly. "Let's say I represent parties with a significant investment in the research being conducted at the pharmaceutical facility. Parties who were quite concerned when Professor Hargrove mentioned his promising student was conducting independent water quality testing that might interest the EPA." Everything clicked into place. Professor Hargrove's sudden insistence that I work late tonight alone, his reluctance when handing over his key card. He'd set me up. "Hargrove knows about this?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "The pharmaceutical company funds half his research," the man replied with a shrug. "Academic integrity is nice in theory, but a $300,000 grant renewal is better." Now, about that data transfer. I was cornered, but the man's posture had relaxed slightly, confident that I posed no threat, that I would comply. His flashlight dipped just enough that I could see more of my surroundings, including the emergency chemical shower handle directly beside my cabinet. Campus safety protocols required all science labs to have emergency systems that functioned even during power outages. The chemical shower was designed to drench anyone exposed to hazardous substances, a high-pressure deluge activated by a simple pull handle. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said, slowly shifting my weight. "I haven't completed any analysis yet. The data wouldn't even make sense to..." In one quick movement, I lunged out of the cabinet and yanked down hard on the shower handle. Instantly, a torrent of water cascaded from the ceiling directly onto the man with the flashlight. He shouted in surprise, the flashlight flying from his hand and clattering across the floor, his electronic device likely ruined by the sudden downpour. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my backpack from the table and sprinted for the main door, now unbarricaded. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, struggling to get out of the shower's flow. The hallway was pitch black, but I knew the building layout well enough to find my way to the stairwell. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste, the sound of pursuit driving me forward. The building's main entrance was a set of glass doors that I expected to find locked, but someone had propped one open with a small wooden wedge. The security man's planned exit route, perhaps? I didn't question the good fortune, just burst through into the cool night air and ran toward the brightly lit administration building where the real campus security was stationed. 20 minutes later, I sat in the chief security officer's room, my clothes still damp, hands wrapped around a cup of terrible coffee. The campus police had responded immediately to my story, called the local police, and were now searching Henley Hall, which, mysteriously, had its power restored shortly after real security arrived. We found evidence of tampering with the circuit breakers, the officer told me, setting down his notebook. And we've detained an unauthorized individual who claimed to be conducting a security inspection, but couldn't produce proper identification. I nodded, still processing how quickly my routine lab work had turned into something from a thriller movie. You mentioned having data that someone might want to suppress? The officer continued. Something about water contamination? I hesitated, then reached into my backpack. In my rush to hide, I'd grabbed not just my personal belongings, but also the case containing my microscope slides, including the Henderson Creek samples that had shown such concerning results. I have the original samples, I said, and backups of all my data stored on an encrypted server not connected to my regular accounts. The officer raised an eyebrow. That's unusually cautious for a routine class project. I gave a weak smile. Professor Hargrove emphasizes security protocols for all scientific data. Ironic, I guess. As it turned out, I wasn't the first student to discover irregularities in samples from near the pharmaceutical plant. 2 years earlier, another student's research had mysteriously corrupted before submission. A year before that, a graduate student had abruptly changed research topics mid-semester after a personal emergency. The investigation that followed my experience uncovered a years-long cover-up of chemical dumping that had contaminated groundwater throughout the county. Professor Hargrove was placed on administrative leave pending criminal charges, and the pharmaceutical company faced both federal prosecution and civil lawsuits from affected communities. I did eventually complete my semester project, though with a different professor overseeing my work. The experience changed my educational focus entirely. I switched from general biology to environmental toxicology with a minor in public policy. Sometimes I still have nightmares about being trapped in that dark lab, hearing those measured footsteps approaching. But what truly haunts me isn't what happened that night. It's the thought of what might have continued happening if I hadn't been there. The slow poisoning of a community, protected by silence and intimidation, all in the name of profit. And I wonder how many other secrets remain hidden, waiting in dark corners of ordinary places, for someone stubborn enough to shine a light. The crisp October air stunned my cheeks as I jogged along the familiar path through Crescent Ridge Park. Maple and oak trees flanked the trail, their leaves a dazzling palette of amber, crimson, and gold. I'd been running this route every Saturday for the past 3 months since moving to Portland, gradually extending my distance each week. Today marked my first attempt at completing the park's full 5-mile loop, a personal milestone I was determined to achieve. The park sprawled over 70 acres of meticulously maintained gardens, open meadows, and densely wooded areas. On weekends, it typically bustled with families, dog walkers, and fellow fitness enthusiasts. But today, an unexpected cold front had deterred the usual crowds. The relative solitude was refreshing, allowing me to focus on my breathing and the steady rhythm of my sneakers against the packed dirt trail. At the 3-mile marker, I paused beneath a towering oak to check my fitness tracker and take a swig from my water bottle. According to my app, I was maintaining a decent pace, but my body was beginning to protest. A dull ache had settled into my lower back, and my knee, injured years ago in a college soccer match, had started to throb ominously. I stretched, watching a squirrel dart across the path with an acorn clutched in its mouth, debating whether to push forward or call it a day. The decision was made for me when my bladder suddenly signaled its urgency. The large coffee I'd consumed before my run was now demanding attention, and with 2 miles still ahead of me, ignoring it wasn't an option. I checked my phone's map of the park. The nearest restroom facility was about a 1/4 mile ahead, near the park's north entrance, the old stone bathhouse that had been renovated last spring. I'd never used this particular facility before, typically starting and ending my runs at the park's southern entrance, where the newer, more modern restrooms were located. But necessity outweighed preference, so I set off again, my pace quickened by growing discomfort. 5 minutes later, I spotted the bathhouse through a clearing in the trees. Unlike the sleek contemporary facilities at the south entrance, this structure was a relic from the park's founding in the 1930s. A squat stone building with a peaked slate roof, its gray walls partly covered by climbing ivy. Despite recent renovations, it retained an old-world charm that seemed both picturesque and slightly out of place in the otherwise modernized park. As I approached, I noticed 2 things. First, there wasn't another person in sight, unusual even on a quiet day. And second, the women's entrance was blocked by a yellow plastic "Cleaning in Progress" sign. I hesitated, bouncing slightly from foot to foot, weighing my options. I could continue to the south entrance restrooms, but that was at least a 15-minute jog in my current state. Or I could wait, though there was no indication of how long the cleaning would take, and no maintenance staff visible. Just as I was about to give up and search for a secluded cluster of bushes, the park maintenance door at the side of the building opened. A middle-aged man in a green uniform emerged, carrying a mop and bucket. He nodded at me as he stowed his supplies in a small utility vehicle parked nearby. "Excuse me," I called, jogging over to him. "Is the women's restroom going to be open soon?" He glanced back at the building, then at his watch. "Should be dry by now. Just finished mopping." His voice had a slight accent I couldn't place. "The sign should have been removed. Go ahead." I thanked him and returned to the entrance as he drove away. The yellow sign was still propped against the door, but I moved it aside and stepped into the dim interior, grateful to finally relieve my discomfort. The inside of the bathhouse was markedly cooler than the autumn air outside, with a musty dampness that clung to my skin. Despite the renovations, the space retained its utilitarian design: concrete floors, stone walls, and high, narrow windows that allowed minimal natural light. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, one of them flickering sporadically, casting uneven light across the room. There were 4 stalls along one wall, with a row of sinks opposite. I chose the stall furthest from the entrance, noting with relief that the renovations had at least included new fixtures and properly functioning locks. As I settled in, I realized how utterly quiet the bathhouse was. No running water, no distant voices of park visitors, just the occasional drip from a faucet and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. My moment of relief was short-lived. As I was about to exit the stall, I heard the heavy outer door of the bathhouse swing open, followed by footsteps on the concrete floor. Something about those footsteps immediately set me on edge. They were deliberate and slow, not the casual entrance of another runner or park visitor. I remained seated, suddenly reluctant to reveal my presence. The footsteps paused, then continued, moving past the sinks. A shadow passed beneath my stall door. Someone was walking slowly down the row of stalls, as if checking each one. My pulse quickened. This behavior seemed odd, especially in a nearly empty park on a cold afternoon. The footsteps stopped directly outside my stall. Through the narrow gap beneath the door, I could see the tips of brown work boots. They were positioned facing my door, motionless. No one spoke or knocked. The person simply stood there, as if waiting, or listening. I held my breath, irrationally hoping the person might assume the bathhouse was empty and leave. Instead, I heard a soft clicking sound, metallic, rhythmic, like a small piece of metal being flipped repeatedly. Click, click. Pause. Click, click. The sound continued for nearly a minute while the boots remained planted in place. Finally, I heard movement again. The boots pivoted and retreated toward the sink area. I exhaled silently, my muscles unclenching slightly. Through the crack between the stall door and frame, I caught a glimpse of a figure standing before the mirror. Tall, wearing the same green maintenance uniform as the man I'd spoken to outside. But when he turned slightly, adjusting his cap, I realized it wasn't the same person. This man was younger, leaner, with a gaunt face partially obscured by the cap's brim. Most disturbing was what he held in his hand, a small pocket knife that he was opening and closing absently, producing the clicking sound I'd heard. As I watched, he placed the knife on the edge of the sink and began washing his hands, but his eyes remained fixed on the mirror, specifically on the reflection of the stall doors behind him. My stall door. He knew I was here. My mind raced through options. I could call out, pretend I hadn't noticed anything strange, exit normally and walk briskly past him. But instinct told me that acknowledging my presence might escalate whatever strange scenario was unfolding. I could remain hidden, hoping he'd eventually leave, but my running app showed it was already 5:17 p.m. The park closed at sunset, around 6:30 this time of year. How long was I willing to wait? Then I remembered my phone. I could text a friend or even call 911 if necessary. As slowly and silently as possible, I withdrew my phone from my armband holder. No service. The stone walls of the old bathhouse were apparently too thick for a reliable signal. The man finished washing his hands but left the water running. He retrieved his knife, clicking it open and closed once more before slipping it into his pocket. Then he began to hum, a low, tuneless sound that somehow heightened the tension rather than breaking it. He moved out of my limited field of vision, but I could still hear him, the humming interspersed with occasional mutterings too quiet to make out. I needed to see what he was doing. Carefully, I shifted position and bent down to look under the stall door. The man was now standing by the entrance, his back to me. He appeared to be doing something with the door, his arms moving in short, deliberate motions. With a sinking feeling, I realized what was happening. He was threading something through the door handles, securing them shut. In that moment, I knew I had to act immediately or risk being trapped. I pulled my pepper spray from my running belt, flushed the toilet to mask any sound, and simultaneously unlatched my stall door. The noise caused the man to turn, surprise briefly registering on his pale face before his expression settled into something more calculated. "Bathroom's closed for cleaning," he said, his voice oddly soft and high-pitched for his size. He gestured toward the entrance, where I could now clearly see a length of wire twisted through the door handles. "Park policy." "I spoke with the maintenance worker outside," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "He said it was fine to use." I stepped out of the stall but maintained distance between us, my hand gripping the pepper spray at my side, still partially concealed by my running shorts. The man's thin lips curved into what might have been intended as a smile, but looked more like a grimace. "That must have been Dave. He's new, doesn't know the procedures yet." He took a step toward me, hand drifting toward his pocket where I knew the knife was stored. "I'm going to have to ask you to wait while I finish my work. Won't take long." "Actually, I need to leave now," I said, taking a strategic step that put a sink between us. "My running group is waiting for me. They know exactly where I am." His eyes, pale blue and unnervingly empty, assessed me. "I don't think so. You came in alone. I've been watching the trails all afternoon." Another step forward. "Nobody uses this bathhouse anymore. That's why they assigned me here. Nice and quiet." My heart hammered against my ribs as the reality of my situation crystallized. This man, whoever he was, had been watching, waiting, and now had me cornered in a remote area of the park. The casual mention of watching the trails suggested this wasn't opportunistic. He'd been planning, perhaps for days, for someone like me. "My husband is tracking my run," I lied, raising my phone. "He can see exactly where I am, and if I stop moving for too long, he'll come looking." I took another step sideways, maintaining the distance between us. The man's expression flickered briefly, doubt, annoyance, before settling back into that unnerving half-smile. "Phones don't work in here," he said, pulling his knife from his pocket and flicking it open. "Old stone walls. One of the reasons I like this spot." "I have a satellite tracker," I countered, continuing my lateral movement toward the entrance. I was nearly at the end of the row of sinks now, with just 8 or 9 feet between me and the wire-secured door. Standard safety equipment for solo female runners these days. He paused, knife glinting under the fluorescent lights, clearly recalculating. I seized the moment of hesitation to make my move, not toward the secured main door, but toward the small maintenance entrance I'd seen the real worker use earlier. If it had been unlocked for him, there was a chance it remained so. I bolted, cutting sharply around the end of the sink counter and sprinting toward the side of the bathhouse. The man reacted with surprising speed, lunging to intercept me, but his boot slipped on the still damp floor. He crashed into the nearest sink, cursing viciously as I reached the maintenance door and grabbed the handle. It turned. Relief flooded through me as I yanked the door open, only to find it open barely 6 inches before catching on something outside. I could see daylight through the gap, smell the crisp autumn air, but the opening was far too narrow to squeeze through. The man had recovered now and was advancing, knife extended before him. "That door's blocked by the supply cabinet," he said, voice no longer soft but cold and clipped. "Always has been. You really should have just stayed in your stall. This could have been so much easier." Trapped between the partially open door and the approaching man, I made the only choice I had left. I raised my pepper spray, aimed, and pressed the button, sending a jet of caustic spray directly toward his face. He screamed, knife clattering to the floor as his hands flew to his eyes. I didn't wait to see more. I threw my body against the maintenance door, pushing with everything I had. The supply cabinet outside scraped against the concrete, moving just enough for me to force my way through the narrow opening, tearing my running jacket in the process. Once outside, I sprinted toward the main path, screaming for help. Behind me, I could hear the maintenance door bang open fully. He'd managed to follow despite the pepper spray. I pushed harder, legs burning, lungs heaving, the sound of pursuing footsteps driving me forward. The path ahead curved around a stand of trees, temporarily blocking me from view of anyone coming from the bathhouse. I made a split-second decision and veered off the trail, diving into a dense thicket of bushes. I curled into a ball, trying to quiet my desperate gasping as the footsteps approached. "You can't hide." The voice was ragged, enraged. "I know these trails better than anyone. I work here every day." The footsteps slowed, and I could hear him breathing heavily, no doubt scanning the underbrush for any sign of movement. I remained frozen, barely daring to breathe, as seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, I heard him move again, continuing down the main path, his pace quickening as he apparently decided I'd kept running. I stayed hidden for 20 more minutes, shaking uncontrollably, straining to hear any sound of his return. When I finally emerged, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the park. I avoided the paths, instead cutting directly through the woods toward the south entrance, where I knew there would be people, light, safety. I encountered a young couple walking their dog near the park center and blurted out my story between gasping breaths. The man immediately called 911 while his partner gave me her jacket and stayed with me until police arrived. The investigation that followed revealed more than I could have imagined. The man, identified as Victor Mercer, wasn't a park employee at all. The real maintenance worker I'd initially spoken to confirmed he'd left the bathhouse unattended, briefly, while retrieving supplies, providing Mercer the opportunity to enter wearing a stolen uniform. Most disturbing were the items police found in a hidden compartment beneath the bathhouse floor. A collection of trophies from at least 7 previous victims across 3 different parks. Mercer had been operating for over 2 years, using his knowledge of remote park areas to target women alone in isolated locations. I was lucky. The pepper spray I carried, a gift from my brother that I'd initially thought excessive, had saved my life. So had the quick thinking and the lies about being tracked. Mercer later confessed that my mention of tracking technology had disrupted his usual method of taking much longer to isolate his victims. I don't run in parks anymore. Even with Mercer behind bars, the memory of those empty blue eyes and clicking knife has permanently altered how I perceive spaces I once found peaceful. I've joined a running club that meets at a local track, finding safety in numbers and open spaces. Sometimes I still dream about the bathhouse, the dripping faucet, the flickering light, the sound of those deliberate footsteps approaching my stall. In the dreams, the maintenance door is always locked, the pepper spray always empty. I wake gasping, sweaty, my heart racing, as if I'm still running through those woods. The most haunting aspect isn't the memory of danger itself, but how ordinary everything had seemed at first. How the transition from normal to nightmare had occurred in such small, incremental steps that I almost didn't recognize it until it was nearly too late. How a public space in broad daylight could harbor such darkness. And I wonder how many everyday places I pass through contain similar threats, invisible until the moment they reveal themselves, when escape might no longer be possible.